So we are here today for Albuquerque in the time of tuberculosis with Mo Palmer. Mo can turn a classroom into her living room through her storytelling, sense of humor, and knowledge of our city. A New Mexico native, she holds an MA in American Studies. She's taught history of New Mexico at Sandia Preparatory. And she has written Albuquerque history column for Albuquerque Tribune and is an author of Albuquerque Then and Now and Presbyterian, the First 100 Years. Please welcome Mo Palmer.
So, I'm going to talk to you about Albuquerque in the time of tuberculosis. And the reason for that title is, when I did this, that movie, Love in the Time of Cholera, was really popular. And I thought, oh, well, that's a really cool name, I'll use that. But then I watched the movie, and it's quite good, and it has nothing to do with cholera, and it was really entertaining. So that was a surprise. So, how many of you are aware that Albuquerque probably I would say underpins 35% of this town? Did you know that?
Yes.
Okay, good, because some people don't know that, so that's why I go out and do this. Now, if I can figure out how to advance it, we'll get started. Oh, these are all the different places and organizations that help me gather up photos and information for this. Okay, tuberculosis. Now, we're going to have an exhibit. The Albuquerque Museum Photo Archive is going to have a photo show on the wall called Chasing the Cure, Tuberculosis Came to Albuquerque. This is going to be curated by their photo archivist, who is Glenn Fye, who is not this man on the couch. Okay, but we're using that as a representative picture. And this exhibit will open May 23rd, so everybody be sure to go down and see it, because you'll see a whole lot of pictures that aren't in this presentation. So that's something to look forward to. And also you can get more information out of the book I did with Press for their anniversary in 2008. I think it says the first 100 years. I don't have my reading glasses on. Oh, I guess I could look up there. Anyway, that's another way to get some more information. I have no idea how long this talk is, so if you want to doze off, it's okay. If I want to doze off, it's okay. Tuberculosis has been with us like forever. This is like Ramses the 2000th or something. Anyway, so back from Egyptian times, and this is an actual mummy that they found and dug up, and this is the way he looks, and he had evidence of tuberculosis. But when I saw this picture, all I could think of was this guy. Y'all know who that is? It's Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones. Doesn't he look almost as bad? Yeah. It reminded me. So tuberculosis has been with us for a very, very long time. And it's with us now. Okay? Today we still have it. In fact, it's kind of having a resurgence, so this is a bad thing. In 2007, you might remember this guy. He had antibiotic-resistant tuberculosis, got on an airplane, flew all of these places with other people on the plane because he wanted to have his wedding. Well, in my opinion, that was an extremely selfish thing to do because he exposed everyone else on all those planes. Nothing happened, though. We were very fortunate nothing came of it. I don't know whatever happened to him. They probably got divorced, you know. However, this is from a documentary on PBS Frontline. Tuberculosis is so bad in places, this is in Swaziland in Africa, and this little boy has what's called multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. So there isn't a whole lot of help for him, and they're opening hospitals or sanatoriums there now. He might make it. This guy has extra drug resistant tuberculosis. There is no cure. So it is making a resurgence. So that's another reason, if you go, here I have to give you a medical lecture now. If you go to urgent care for a cold, don't let them give you antibiotics. That just adds into this resistance that's growing to the drugs that we have. Okay, they called it all kinds of things. They called it TISAS. I was mispronouncing that and someone corrected me. It was called consumption. Scrofula if it went into the lymph system. and white plague. So it was very, very well known by many, many names. And people didn't know what caused it. They just knew all these people got it. This is a photo by Jacob Riis, who wrote the photo anthology, How the Other Half Lives. People thought it came from people living in cramped quarters like this. Now I counted and I can see about 7 people all living in this little hovel of a room here. Now we know it didn't cause it, but it certainly did contribute to passing it around. They thought maybe a person was born with a weak constitution. My kid was born sick and stayed sick and then died. So possibly they thought it was inherited. Possibly they thought it came from inbreeding. This is Charles II of Spain. He was a product of centuries of inbreeding, and he was literally kind of like a moron. I mean, remember they used to classify people with different nasty names? When he was 5 years old, someone said, "Don't you think we ought to comb his hair? After all, he is the king of Spain." All right, so inbreeding was considered to be possible cause. A dissipated lifestyle. This, of course, is my favorite painting in Edward Hopper called Nighthawks. But you see, they're sitting there and it's late at night and drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes. So they thought that if you had that kind of a lifestyle, possibly that was what caused tuberculosis. So they were really fishing to find out what it was all about. Isn't that a great painting? It had an enormous, profound impact on popular culture, which you may not have ever thought about. But this is Lord Byron George Gordon. He was, of course, a famous British poet or something like that. He wanted to, I'm not very literary, he wanted to die of tuberculosis because he thought to waste away. It became very fashionable to waste away and turn all pale and die. Unfortunately for Lord Byron, he caught a common cold and complications of it killed him, so he didn't get to die so dramatically. I would read the name of this painter for you, but I can't pronounce that. The pale look, ladies really took to the pale look. Even the Cleopatras, you know, in that era, they would paint their face with the white makeup, and ladies wanted to look pale, and ladies wanted to look very thin. Some things ladies never change. We don't have to wear the corset anymore, but we don't dare eat a bite. It had enormous impact on the literary popular culture. This is, of course, Les Mis. This is Fantine, and she's dying of tuberculosis. Whoops, sorry, didn't mean to do that to you. Okay, this is Alexandre Dumas. It was also grist for the opera mill. This is my little South Park Valkyrie. I really like her. But many operas, including La Boheme and La Traviata, they're about these heroines that are dying of this wasting disease. It's lung disease. Now, obviously tuberculosis would make it so you couldn't breathe, and yet these ladies are belting out these incredible soprano arias, you know, so there's some kind of a disconnect there. But popular culture was impacted by tuberculosis. So was domestic architecture. This is the Limke Historic House over on South Walter. You'll notice that it has a screened porch across the front. Now, I've eaten lunch in there. It's very pleasant to sit in the screened porch. Sleeping outside became very popular because it was one of the ways to cure tuberculosis. So everybody started slapping a sleeping porch on their house. Now, do not go out and tell everybody, "Oh look, there's a screen porch, Mo Palmer says a tubercular lives there." That's not what I said. That comes back to me all the time. I said it probably impacted the architecture. And also, who is that? That's Dracula, of course. Ladies, that is the hottest Dracula that ever graced the screen. That's Frank Langella. Interesting, though, that it may have had something to do with consumption. I read an article in I think it was the New England Journal of Medicine, and in this one little village they thought they had a vampire. Well, it turns out now they're looking at the bones and so forth and so on, and figuring out that this little village had an epidemic of consumption. And if you think about it, you turn all white, you get all thin, maybe your blood is being sucked out. I would let him suck out my blood. I don't mind. In 1882, Robert Koch, who was a scientist, did discover what was causing all this. And it's a bacteria. It's an airborne bacillus, so you get it by breathing it in. Now, they had the discovery of what it was, but they didn't know what to do about it, just knew what was causing it. And this gave rise to the great sanatorium movement in Europe, where there were all these wonderful resorts and spas and sanatoriums to which you could go if you could afford it. If you could afford it. Okay? In America, this is Edward Livingston Trudeau. He was a doctor who got tuberculosis, and he said, I'm going to go out to my cabin in the Adirondacks or something like that. Anyway, and he got well by living out there with the fresh air. So he thought, here we have a cure. And he got 2 ladies who worked for him, or 2 working girls or something, and they came out to the cottage, and they also got better. So we thought, aha, we have a cure. It's altitude, fresh dry air, rest, good food, and very weird treatments. And this started a sanatorium movement all over the United States, in appropriate places. This is Josiah Gregg. Josiah Gregg, and I've got to tell you, for years I called him Hosea because I'm a New Mexican, and I pronounce everything like Spanish. So to me he was Josiah Gregg, but he was Josiah. And he had terrible respiratory problems, but he came out here over the Santa Fe Trail after Mexico opened trade with the United States, and he got well. So there was another example. Well, this case, it became all the rage. And you know, when you're really, really sick, you'll do almost anything. That's how people get tangled up with quacks and stuff, you know, because you're desperate and you'll do anything to try to get well. But we know he got better because he continued to trade for many years. What really brought it home here was the arrival of the railroad. This is the railroad in Albuquerque. I've forgotten how to punch the laser. Well, I guess there's nobody in here but me, so I'll have to do it. Oh, maybe you, oh, ha, ha. Okay, you're looking at the railroad tracks going north to Santa Fe, and this is what will become Railroad or Central Avenue. Isn't that an awesome picture? That's from the Albuquerque Museum. This is, and don't believe, because I see on the internet all the time, there's this 2-story depot that came a little later that had the separate entrances for ladies and men. That was not the first depot. This is the first depot. This, of course, is an outhouse. I want to do a whole study on outhouses, because I don't understand, why didn't they design the outhouse to match the mansion? That would have been kind of cool, wouldn't it? I need to tell you, I'm going to retire from doing all this and just research stuff like that. Stuff that I want to know. Anyway, with the coming of the railroad, of course, then people who had actually been walking out here or coming in the backs of open wagons could get on the train and come to Albuquerque for a cure. Or so they hoped. No, wrong button. This was the commercial club. It was at the corner of 4th and Gold. It was a building, and that's it, and it was also an organization which preceded the Chamber of Commerce, so it was the city fathers all getting together. But they also had a lot of events. They had fancy balls in here, and old guys could live up here. Well, not necessarily old guys, but this is probably a pervert looking out the window. But in any event, all over the West, what was popular was to build your town. They called it boosting the town. And all the Western towns wanted to get bigger, so they wanted to attract business, and they wanted to attract people and industry and all kinds of things that would grow their town. Someone in the commercial club had the brilliant idea, oh, I know what let's do, let's invite a bunch of sick people over. I'm not making a word of this up. Wait, I need a drink of water. So they started putting out booklets. This is actually a booklet that we bought. It's in the Albuquerque Museum. And inside, it says certain restoration of health. Now, here's a disclaimer that probably everybody missed. It says, to those who come in time. But I'll bet you most people didn't read that because they just thought, oh boy, I can go to Albuquerque and get healed. Okay, so they started to come. And they stayed everywhere. This was the Strong building at the corner of 2nd and Copper, which was Orange Strong. You guys remember Strong Mortuary? Okay, well, let me show you something. They rented rooms upstairs, and they sold crockery and hardware and stuff down here, and back here they had the funeral home. So the funeral homes got ambulances, and if they came to the train station and picked you up, now this is Strong's with the white horses, you were probably going to a sanatorium. If they picked you up with the black horses, then you knew for sure you were dead, and you were probably going to what I believe is an early picture of Fairview Cemetery. I've not been able to prove this, but I certainly think that's what it is. I don't know if you can see they're pulling the guy in the caisson back here, and here's all the grieving people. So a lot of people came, and you'd see in the newspaper, man found dead on train. It was very routine, very routine. And it even continued as late as after 1918. This is looking for health seekers. Now it does say, provided they have the means to secure the accommodations, because what was really happening is all these poor sick people were coming. And then it gives you a big list of stuff you can go out and see as a tourist. Whoops. No, and they stayed everywhere. This was South 1st Street, long before everything was torn down, and almost all the hotels and buildings had a 2nd story that would rent you a room, so a lot of tuberculosis people lived there. This was the kind of famous Savoy Hotel, which is long gone now. You're looking north on Central. Here's the Alvarado. Okay, so they would stay in places like that. Or they would build literally a little shack. This is a postcard that I bought off eBay for the Albuquerque Museum, and it's a real shack in the sand hills. And there's a little girl, I photoshopped this to such a degree you can no longer see it. So I have to get a new copy from the archive and start over. But there's a little girl sitting here, and on the back of the card it says little Susie, or whatever her name is doing so well in the sun out here in the Southwest. This guy built the shack himself, and this I got off the cover of another booster booklet, so saying, come out here and you'll get well. This, if you want more information, this is a horrible thing. I got trapped into doing a video accidentally for C-SPAN. They called me up and said, will you do a stand-up? A stand-up is just where you get up and you say a few words, and then a picture comes, and then a different person says a few words, you know, like on a documentary. And I thought, you know, I can handle that. When the thing came out, I was narrating it. I had no idea that I was narrating it, and I was horrified, and I called that producer, and I said, you tricked me, and she said, I know. She said, they all told me that you wouldn't do it if I told you the truth. The point is that, and you can see this, if you just type in Mo Palmer C-SPAN, this video will come up as about 5 minutes of me making a total fool of myself. This is actually a tuberculosis cottage in Hunings Highland. That's why we shot this video there. Because people started to build these little cottages to rent out to tuberculosis people. I don't remember what comes next. I'll say, oh yeah, and people were living in tents. This is not a local picture. This is a Dorothea Lange from the Depression. But I needed a picture of people living in tents. And now that we have the goldenness of the internet, I can steal photos at will. I just take whatever I want and use them. So, it was a mess. Because there were a lot more poor people than there were wealthy people. Luckily for Albuquerque, the Sisters of Charity from Ohio came out to Santa Fe, actually, and built a sanatorium there. This is Sister Blandina, our most famous nun. Maybe I'll do something on her someday. She built a lot of stuff in Old Town, but the other thing they did was they built St. Joseph's Sanatorium, and it is St. Joseph. It was never St. Joseph's. It's St. Joseph's Sanatorium at 715 East Grand. And so that opened in 1902, but they didn't have enough room. They had a huge waiting list, and again, it was a place you had to pay. So where were the poor people going? Out in the Southeast Heights into the hills. This is one of the cottages at St. Joe's. A man walks in the door one day at the archive when I was the archivist, and he said, You want some pictures of people at St. Joe's? And of course I peed in my pants. And he not only gave me the pictures, he gave me money to have them copied and housed. And archiving is an expensive thing, you know, so it was a very generous donation. And so this is his father or his grandfather standing at one of the cottages at St. Joseph Sanatorium. In 1903, this man, Reverend Hugh Cooper, got tuberculosis. He took ill at a Billy Sunday revival. Who knows? Put your hand up if you know who Billy Sunday was. That's pretty good, you guys. All right, you get an A. He got tuberculosis, and he came out here to recuperate. And he did. He healed. And he also became the pastor of the First Presbyterian Church. This is his secretary. Whoops. Wrong button. This is Mrs. Van. Have you ever heard of Mrs. Van? She was like the icon of Presbyterian Hospital because she worked there for like 60 years until she died. But he and his wife, when he started feeling better, started to call on these poor people out in the dunes and the tents and the sandhills and the shacks, and he was horrified because he recognized immediately that if you were in there with a tubercular kid, you were going to get it. And so he determined he was going to build another sanatorium, and so he did. And in 1908, he opened the Southwestern Presbyterian Sanatorium in this little cottage, which was up on a hill at the corner of Oak and Central. It belonged to Mr. Brockmeyer, who had a bicycle shop downtown, and I don't know, was on the city council or something. You probably don't remember this, because I'm going to show you. It looked a lot different after they started adding to it. Over here is a cow. So clearly people were homesteading and living there and growing their own cows, or whatever it is you do with cows. This is, you may remember it like this. I do. This was in my lifetime. These buildings were there, right where Presbyterian is now. That's from a glass lantern slide. I happen to be the archivist for Presbyterian, and so I have these in the archive. I broke one. I know, they don't know, don't tell them. But anyway, it's just priceless, and I remember it looking like that. We used to go by there on the bus. So, okay, which button? This is the Albuquerque Sanatorium, which was opened by Dr. Abraham Shortle, who was a specialist in tuberculosis. This was at Gold and Sycamore, which is right on top of Presbyterian. Dr. Shortle had gone to Europe on his honeymoon, this is his bride, Alice, to study tuberculosis, and we have actual letters in the Albuquerque Museum archive that she wrote back to her mother while they were traveling in Europe and he was studying TB. This is their daughter, Sarah. She's 2 years old. Sarah was a good friend of my mother, and she told me, she said, it was okay living at the sanatorium until I was 2, and then the patients couldn't stand it anymore and we had to buy a house in town. Oddly or ironically, one might say, Dr. Shortle got an ear infection. I suppose it could have been caused by the tuberculosis bacteria. I don't know, but it went into mastoiditis. He could not cure himself any more than he could cure all of those patients he was taking care of, and so he died. But the sanatorium now, there have been several studies on sanatoriums in Albuquerque, and the same mistake has been made and carried forward. This was the Albuquerque San. After Dr. Shortle died, it became the Lutheran San, and later it served as the HEPA, which was the Greek sanatorium. But if you just go through a city directory and that's all the research you do and you see those 3 names, you're going to count that as 3, right? And it was really only 1. So you have to know the ins and outs of this stuff. This is Presbyterian. This is 2 of our buildings. This is Minister's Cottage and McCormick Cottage. This is Gold Avenue. It's just been cut through. You can see the sandhill here. You see what they were dealing with. You don't think about it when you drive up Central, do you? But the sandhills were enormous. Right there is the Albuquerque Sanatorium that was Dr. Shortle's. So it was right on top of each other. In fact, here's a close-up. They were right there together. Yeah. And this was when Gold Avenue was still a street. Later, Presbyterian has appropriated it, and that street no longer exists.
not there.
But that's why this stretch was called Lunger's Row and TB Avenue and Lunger's Avenue, TB Alley, Lunger's Row. And these people would walk around all day wearing their pajamas and bathrobes, and they would go back and forth between sanatoriums. You have to remember that some of these people were actually confined to these places for 2 and 3 and 4 years at a time. So of course they formed friendships and relationships. There were even romances. John Duran was a patient here, and his wife's aunt was a patient there, and they met and fell in love and got married. And I got to go interview them for the book that we did. So, and then there were scandalous romances I can't tell you about. This is the UNM football team, such as it was, okay? This little house, I think it was part of the Porterfield Homestead, because I have found that, and that's another thing I'm going to study in retirement. I'm going to look into the homesteads. But there it is a little house. Look, they don't even have any helmets or anything. Okay, and the next time we see that, I see it in the Methodist Sanatorium brochure, and they have bought this little house, or it's been given to them. I suspect it was given to them because Mrs. Porterfield was on the board, and it would be logical that if it was her homestead, she would stay involved. The religious denominations did tons of stuff for the tuberculosis community. But there's their little cottages. Now somewhere I read, and this could have been 30 years ago, but I read that you could go to UNM and have tuberculosis and go to your classes in the daytime and then go back to your cottage at night. And this picture would suggest that, because here's the little cottages, and here's the little, what I think is the Porterfield house. The Porterfield home and stuff was over here. But and anyway, here's the men's and women's dorms. So apparently you could go to UNM and cough your way through class and then go back. And then that became the Methodist Sanatorium. Now, at Central and Pine was the Sipes Sanatorium. And again, here's another good one where in someone's dissertation I saw this Sipes counted as one and this one counted as another. So 2, but you can clearly see the building has been remodeled, and this turns into the Methodist Deaconess Sanatorium, okay? Which was at Central and Pine. This was the Murphy Sanatorium, which later became St. John's. The Episcopalian Church took it over, and then became Hillcrest Sanatorium. Okay, so there's another example where one thing serves 3 names and was miscounted as additional sanatoriums. This is the Indian Sanatorium, built in 1936, and you can still see this. Have you ever seen this building? It is an absolutely fabulous Art Deco building, and it's over on Lomas, right next to University Hospital.
Yes.
They've dorked up the front. I hope the architect isn't in attendance. But they added on a big canopy for ambulances and stuff, so you have to kind of go around the block and get out of the car to really see the beauty of this building. This is Monkbridge Manor, which was out on 4th Street, and it was a private residence that belonged to the guy who owned the Occidental Building and built the Occidental Building, and he owned the trolley cars. And he lived out here for a while, and then he sold it, and it became a tuberculosis sanatorium. Am I in your way? Because I don't know where to go. Or you can tell me where to go. And it became a private residence. Well, one day this lady calls me up and she says, "My mother worked there, do you want a picture?" And I, of course, fainted. And got this picture. This one was Miramontes on the Mesa, and it was at Carlisle and Manal. And after it was a TB San, it became Regina Caeli Church and School. But my friend, the artist Morris Ripple, told me it really, to begin with, when it started, it was a whorehouse. Now, if that's true, there's an irony here, because what sits there now, this is all gone, but what's there now is like a place that makes mattresses. So there's some kind of cosmic connection there. Point I'm making is, yes, they were all over town. There weren't as many as some people come up with a total of, but we had a lot. This was the Nazareth Sanatorium, started by a different order of sisters way out on Edith. And it started for tuberculosis, and then it became for the disturbed, the mentally, and we used to get in the car and drive out there thinking we were going to see maniacs or something, you know. We thought that was when I was about 15 and shouldn't have been driving. This is Sandia Ranch, which was another sanatorium, and it's way out on Edith as well. It's still there, but it's a mess. It's turned into this. It's a high center for graffiti, vandalism, but it's always on the ghost tours. There's all these things that say there's ghosts of the insane that haunt this building. Whatever, you know. They need to tear it down, I think, is actually what they need to do. This is the Albuquerque Indian School, which was at 12th and Manal. But I'm not showing you that because it's the Indian School. Over here is, oh, whoops. Okay, no. There we go. I'm so coordinated. This is St. Anthony's Orphanage, which was across the street from the Albuquerque Indian School. I would mention that we managed a whole bunch of groups. Historic Albuquerque, Ted Hohola, some of his class, a whole bunch of us got together and saved that building. This is the only standing original building on that campus. And we managed to save it from being razed. So that was a big deal. This is the Indian School Hospital, so we know they had their own medical care. We also know that their children got tuberculosis. There are several of the Indian School children buried at Fairview Cemetery. Because I work with Susan Schwartz, she's the Fairview Cemetery historian. But why I put this picture up here is because look what I found. No, that isn't what I found. Well, why are you not? Let me go back one. Aha, that's why. Here's a close-up. Can you see these little cottages? What are those? We know they're not for, this is another thing I'm going to research. We know they're not for the Indian School because they had their own hospital. Okay, in fact, they have a whole lot of little kids buried in a park near there in one mass grave because they can't repatriate the bones because of the tuberculosis. But I've got to look into this when I have time and see what sanatorium was near their grounds but not related to them. Isn't that a neat picture? All right, this is just to kind of orient you to sort of more or less where I am. And also to show you that we archivists spend a lot of time dating photographs. I have spent like 6 to 8 hours on one photo sometimes. This is a really prime example of a good one to date. Because this is the Hotel Franciscan, which was at 6th and Central. And we know that was built in 1923 by subscription by people for the city. Some of you are nodding, I'm assuming you remember it. I remember it. Okay, this is our little electric trolley car, and they didn't go out of business till 1928. So now we've narrowed it between 1923 and 1928. But this is the corner of 5th and Central. What is not there? The chemo. And we know the chemo was built in 1927. So we can really narrow the date down on this photo and get a good view of what Albuquerque was like. And this building was there, I think, until Sears finally built their store there. Let's talk a little about life in the sanatoriums. As I said, a lot of people wound up being here for years and years. And of course, relationships formed. Oh no, wrong button. I hope I didn't blind you with that one. They had rates. This is St. Joseph Sanatorium. Individual bungalow, $85. Private rooms, $100 to $125. But think how much money that was in 1910. Okay, that's a good bit of money. So obviously, of course, the sanatoriums did some charity work, mostly because they were affiliated with different religious denominations. But it was kind of costly. And if you wanted to stay with your patient, you could do that for $2 a day. So you too could get TB for $2 a day. They had a lot of rules. These are the rules from Presbyterian. You're not allowed to purchase or take any medication not prescribed by your doctor. Ha-ha. Okay, and no card playing. And so here's their daily schedule. You got up at 7:15, and what you did all day was eat and lie around and then take a rest. Okay? Hints and helps. It is proven fact that tuberculosis is curable. And the probability of a cure is in direct proportion to the effort put forth by the individual. Well, I guess if you shuffled off, you should take a guilt suppository or something, I don't know. But as far as this medicine goes, you could get all this over the counter. Here's opium, cocaine, bear-made heroin. They had a little warning, whoops, maybe have it for me. Walter Houseman, who was a local photographer, historian, and the person who salvaged most of the Cobb collection for Albuquerque, he had a drugstore, and he said he used to get on his bike and deliver this kind of medicine to these tuberculosis patients all the time. So if it didn't cure you, at least it probably made you feel better. But this I put in here just for you guys, because Dr. Williams' pink pills for pale people. Now I just told you everybody wanted to be all pale and white, and so then they were selling pills against that. So, you know, as schizophrenic as it's ever been, I suppose. Now we're going to talk a little about treatments. I have no idea what they're doing here. I know that this guy is an x-ray tech because I have him in other pictures in the press archive. And this is the operating room in our new hospital built in 1933. So I'm not quite sure what they're getting ready to do to him. But here are some of the various things that they did do to people. This lady is being drained over a frame. It looks positively medieval, doesn't it? It's like the torture rack or something. They would go in and do a thoracotomy where they would take out part of your lung and part of your ribs. And of course those do not regenerate, so that's the way you live. But they thought this was a treatment. Or they would collapse one lung. Okay, now, before I became a historian, this is going to sound dumb, but what I was an ambulance person. And so when we got what's called pneumothorax, which is where one of your lungs collapses and is surrounded by air, that's a medical emergency. But they did this routinely. And John Duran told me, he said, after I was released from the sanatorium, I would get on the city bus and go down to press, and they would collapse my lung. And then I would get back on the bus and ride home. And I said, John, didn't that hurt? And he said, oh, it could have killed me. But it was so routine then, you know? You have to understand this is what was being done. The biggest thing to do, though, was to chase the cure. And here's our guy again. I believe this is a Presbyterian photo. And he is on a chaise lounge, which we call here Chase Lounge, right? And I think, and Glenn at the museum and I have talked about, maybe that's where that expression, chasing the cure, came from. I don't know, I can't prove that. That's just one of my strange ideas. But you can see all around him, there's little cottages that have been built, and so people came to chase the cure. We don't know how many died because we didn't keep good death records. And also, when you had TB, you were very likely to succumb to pneumonia, or you were likely to succumb to a bad cold, actually like Lord Byron, because your lungs were in such bad condition. So we don't really exactly know. I can't tell you, well, 50% of them died and 50% of them didn't. I can't tell you that because I don't know. And the other cure was you had to eat. This is one meal at Presbyterian. And you were expected to eat the whole thing, and in between, they gave you a glass of sherry laced with raw eggs. I know. I could probably handle the sherry, but forget the raw eggs. And all of this was supposed to make you better. This is Mary Helen Alfred, right here. She had tuberculosis, and the sanatoriums didn't normally take children. But she and her mother got on the train and rode out here and knocked on the door at press, and Mrs. Fan said, oh, well, you're here. You might as well stay. So there she is in her room. And here she is after her course of treatment, and she has gained 50 pounds from the food at the sanatorium. And the doctor said, Mary Helen, you must get out and walk around the grounds. But she found some place to sit where she could just watch the cars go by on Central. This is kind of interesting. See all these bottles and stuff? This is her room. And the shelf, a good view of the interior of the sanatorium. She was very much alive in 2008. We interviewed her for the book. I don't know if she's alive now, but she might be. And this is just some random pictures of people at different sanatoriums. This is St. Joseph. Here's a Halloween party going on at the Albuquerque San. I mean, they became friends and they developed activities to keep themselves busy. Here's some guys at the Albuquerque San. This girl, I don't know, maybe she's typing the great American novel. Maybe it's Elizabeth Barrett Browning, I don't know. Here's the style du jour pajamas. This says press flappers, and people walked around like that in night clothes all the time. It was totally common to see that. So you get the feeling for the fact that they banded together and make friends. And they were also allowed out, because at that time we still didn't really grasp that they shouldn't be exposing others. And in every album I've looked at from a tuberculosis sanatorium or a patient who was one, I find this. This is the first American pageant, okay, which was a thing they had. Glenn Fye at the museum has up right now an exhibit on the first American, which was kind of like our version of the Gallup ceremonial. And you can still get down and see that a little bit before they take it down for the May 23rd new one. So we know they were out because these are pictures from their albums. This was when the Pickwick bus hit the train down at Isleta. And they, this is from an actual tuberculosis person's album. So they all jumped in the car and ran down there to take a look and be part of the ooh-ah squad, as we call it in ambulance work. Okay, so you could see, and it killed a bunch of people. Greyhound used to be Pickwick. That's what that really is. And here's an interior view, a rare interior view of the Presbyterian Sanatorium. I think these guys were both ministers, and they're in the minister's cottage because we had a special building where sick ministers could go. This is a cottage that some patient decided she wanted to remodel it, and it would be her own cottage. And it was Helen North, and this is North Cottage. She's got her bedroom back here. I don't know if you can see this because the light isn't so hot, but right here and right there, if you were able to see it, what you would see are ashtrays. So they were smoking like mad. I read a biography by Judy Collins, and she had tuberculosis, and she went to the San, and they sat around and smoked cools all day. Mrs. Van told her, Helen, don't go out into the weather. You have a bad cold. You're going to get sick. And Helen went anyway, and guess what happened? She got sick and died. So we had that cottage for a while. This is Larry Glazebrook. He's at the Methodist Deaconess Stand. Some of you might know the Glazebrook family. They came here and with him and stayed, and his mother used to help me out quite a bit at the museum. And he's writing the Kilgloom Gazette. They had their own newspaper for news and doings among the tuberculosis people. And it turned into the Herald of the Well Country. I think there are a couple of issues at the museum. I know the Center for Southwest Research has some, and you can go and look at these. And Presbyterian had its own. It was called the Sanatorium Quarterly, and the first one was in 1923. In the archive, we have an entire set of these. It ran all the way through 1974. And it has stories about different things and pictures, good pictures that sometimes I don't find the picture itself, just the one in the Sanatorium Quarterly. And they were always asking for stuff. So these were not profitable places. They needed sheets, they needed blankets, they needed all this kind of stuff for the patients. So they put a lot of appeals into their newsletter.
What's the significance of that? It's a fly, right? What's the?
I have no idea. Maybe they thought of.
And a comrade.
Okay, will you wait, please, because we are recording. Okay, and I don't have any idea. Do you? Nancy, do you? Diane? No? Okay, nobody knows why. That's your homework. And then they had another place out in Tijeras called Camp Well Country. It was also called Camp Killbloom. It had a variety of names over time. And it was apparently a sanatorium on its own, because this is obviously an advertising brochure. And Press owned it for a while, and the Methodists owned it for a while. I don't know who else owned it for a while, but it's still out there, and it looks like this. You should be able to recognize this mountain, because when you come through the canyon, you see that. And it's still there. It's called Hobbies, and you can learn more about that in Mike Smith's book, Towns of the Sandia Mountains. Well, of course, eventually, people went, oh my God, you can get this. And things started to change a bit. As early as 1913, the city put out an ordinance which said you will not spit on the street, or you will go to jail for 90 days and get a fine, or both. Folks, in my humble opinion, this should be enforced today. I'm sorry, but that's a really gross habit that especially guys in big pickup trucks have. That was my political statement for my lifetime. They had to start carrying these little cups around, okay, so they could spit in them. It's really gross, isn't it? And then the public wises up, and instead of saying room for rent, they start, these are all from the Albuquerque paper, and it says, no sick, no sick, no sick. Okay, so they began to catch on. Then we have the decline of the sanatoriums. Well, what happened? Well, of course, with World War II and all, they discovered penicillin, but it wouldn't quite kill tuberculosis. They needed to add something, and I think what they added was streptomycin. But the coming of the war was the end of TB in the United States as we know it. Because then they were able to give them these wonder drugs, and people got better. So for the sanatoriums, it was either do something else or fold, because they no longer had a function. Luckily for St. Joseph, they had already built a full-service hospital in, 1927. And this building is still standing. You can go see it, you can go walk around in it. Okay? It's a wonderful building. So they had a full-service hospital. Presbyterian, as I told you, had a full-service hospital. Okay, this is Oak Street right here. So this is all closed off now, but if you drive down Oak to Central, if you look to your right, you'll see that this is the Maytag building. And Frederick Maytag, who by the way did not invent the washing machine, he distributed it. His daughter Lucille Maytag was out here in one of the sanatoriums, and he gave Press, I don't know, $50,000 or something. It all turned into a big lawsuit later, but that's a different story. So Press was able to go forward, right, because they had their other facility. This is Baton Memorial Methodist Hospital. When the Methodist Deaconess Sanatorium folded, the Methodists built this hospital, which was out on Gibson. I want to point out, I have someone in the audience here who was actually born in the Presbyterian Sanatorium and has donated, Sid Ash is with us today. He has donated his birth certificate to the Presbyterian Archive, and he was born right in there with all those tuberculosis people. Mrs. Van said she had no idea why everybody didn't get TB, but they didn't. And then ironically, the sanatorium became like, maybe today you would call it a hospice. Would that be a good? And his mother died in the same building he was born in. So the Baton Memorial Methodist Hospital was still going when I was at the ambulance service, because I used to send ambulances out there all the time. And then it was surrounded by Lovelace. And Lovelace indeed came here with tuberculosis, but he settled in Fort Sumner, and that is a whole nother story, which has been very well covered by Dr. Jake Speidel. I think he's written the history of Lovelace, so I would refer you to that, because I don't know too much about it. So they had to change and move forward, or it was over. And they start to come down. This is the only picture I could find of the Methodist Sanatorium being torn down. That's their smokestack being pulled down by cables. Okay. This picture kills me. This is that beautiful sand I showed you coming down. in front of Presbyterian's new buildings, Tower B and Tower C. This was in 1967. I told their administrator, I said, you just have no sense of history. And he said, you just have no sense of progress. And what could I say? I guess I don't. And here's beautiful St. Joe's going down in front of their new hospital. So this is how they survived. They turned into full-fledged medical care. This is where St. Joseph Sanatorium was. This is what's there today. And I would say that tuberculosis, probably 1 out of 3 to 4 people I interview, when I say, why are you in Albuquerque? They will say, oh, my grandfather had asthma. Oh, my grandmother had tuberculosis. Oh, my mother was in a sanatorium. So a huge percentage of the people who live here today are here as a result of a lung disorder. So it's very important that this be pointed out and not left out, because it's such a big part of Albuquerque's history. This was the Ives Memorial. This was the Methodist Hospital, and they turned this building over to the public. And so they were always having speeches in canasta and bridge and stuff in the Ives Memorial. And the guy who owned it turned it into this, and it was the elegant, wonderful Park Lane Hotel at Pine and Central, which immediately, as do most hotels on Central, turned bad and got torn down. Eventually what was there was Gallus Motors on Central. Do you remember that? It's exactly where that was. It also brought us in people who stayed and helped the economy and changed the history of the state. This is Carrie Tingley. You see how we all were young and thin and beautiful at one time? And this is Clyde, her husband, who came out here because she had tuberculosis, and he accompanied her on the train. And when they got to the train station, her mother was sick. And the doctor came out and treated her mother and looked at Carrie and said, you can't go on to Phoenix, you need to stay here. So they got off the train, and thus a simple twist of fate, as Bob Dylan would say, changed our history. Here's Clyde by the governor's mansion, and he had everything to do with our history. Love him or hate him, you have to admit that. Clinton P. Anderson came here for tuberculosis. He stayed in the Methodist Sanatorium and stayed to become our senator and our congressman and all that jazz. Can you tell I'm not very political? Not too interested in politics. This is Catherine Kennedy O'Connor, who came with tuberculosis and married her husband Jimmy and started the Little Theater. This is Grace Edmeister Thompson, who came with tuberculosis and started the Albuquerque Symphony in Carlisle Gym, of all places, is where they played. And this is our architect laureate, John Gamim. That's one of his creations, Zimmerman Library at UNM, who also came for TB. He stayed in the sanatorium in Santa Fe, but he then went on to become our primo Southwest-style builder. So what I'm saying is, I guess in a way we profited, because we got these people who liked it and didn't leave. These, of course, are the Simses, John, Albert, and Ruth Hannah McCormick Sims. And they had everything to do with everything. The Albuquerque Academy, Los Poblanos, Sandia School for Girls, Sandia Prep, Ruth Hannah Memorial at Press, blah, blah. They came, I can't remember if both of those brothers or one of them had TB, I've forgotten. And this is just a little picture series of Albuquerque to show you that here come all these people, and these people have to have, as well as do the ones that come for the railroad and come for the tourism and so forth and so on. But it grew the town, which is what those city boosters originally wanted done. So here's some ladies grocery shopping. Ladies, how would you like to grocery shop in June in Albuquerque like that? And here's Skinner's Grocery. They had to have clothes. This was Washburn's. It was at the corner of 2nd and Gold for eons before they tore it down. I will say, though, when we did downtown revitalization, I brought all these pictures to the architectural charrette. Isn't that a cool word? A charrette, where they all get together and talk. And they did try. If you go down there and look now, you'll see some of these details on the buildings they did install. And they left the Chamber of Commerce has its door, as its corner, right on the corner. This was one of our schools, because all these kids had to go to school. This was the First Ward Elementary School, which was at Edith and what is now Martin Luther King. Don't you think that would scare you if you were a 6-year-old child and you had to start? We had 4 of those. And this is 8th and Central. Anybody know what this is today? It's Coco's Restaurant. And this was the Casement Flats, which was apartment buildings that were across the street, so you're looking east. So the point I'm making is, indeed it did what they wanted. It grew the town. What else it did, we're not sure. This was a nursing school. Anybody recognize this building? I bet some of you go here. What is it? It's the I Associates, but it was St. Joseph's School of, it was Regina Hall, St. Joseph's School of Nursing. And before that, Dr. Lukens built that as a children's home and a hospital, so it was an orphanage. And I think when you go in there, that those little rooms they put you in so the tech comes and see you, I bet those were the kids' rooms. And that is still standing. Press had a nursing school. UNM opened a nursing school in 1949. So you see how everything is blooming and growing because of this disease. And this, of course, is UNM. The UNM School for Medicine started here, 1965. That's the Dr. Pepper bottling company on Stanford. I drove by there the other day, but I don't see a trace of it. I couldn't find it. And we have dental hygiene or dental assistant program or something. So I would say that all of this is underpinned by this medicine show that came to Albuquerque. And so go see the new exhibit when they get it up, which is Tuberculosis Came to Albuquerque, which I think is a nifty title. It is. Now I've forgotten how to do this. Oh, how quickly one forgets. We have one of the most advanced and recognized emergency medical systems in the country. We have Lifeguard Helicopter, which was initially an effort between Press and UNMH. I don't know that Press has anything to do with it now, but I do have pictures of this in the archive. Our ambulance paramedic units are just outstanding. Our paramedics with our fire department. And this is a picture of the first heart transplant. This is an actual picture in the operating room. First heart transplant in New Mexico at Presbyterian. So what a legacy, huh? So it went from this, which is that little cottage I showed you at the corner of Oak and Railroad Avenue in 1908. And it has continued to grow. And there's one of the representative places today. Now you can throw your eggs.